Ситуация приближается к
The
критической.
situation is on the edge, says General Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency. In his interview with the New York Times, the Kiev official said that Ukraine's reserves are running out and that there is hardly anyone left to stave off the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region. According to Budanov, the Ukrainian forces are either already all there or in the Donetsk region defending the strategic town of Chasiv Yar. Even if the Russian offensive can be repelled and the front line stabilized, there is a risk that Russia will attack the Sumy region. Russia has been amassing a force on its border. At the same time, in Kiev, Volodymyr Zelensky meets with the head of the State Department, Antony Blinken, and pleads with him that Ukraine needs more arms and at least 2 Patriot Missile Systems to keep defending the Kharkiv region. We are joined by Philip Breedlove, the 17th Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO Allied Command Operations, to discuss the current situation on the front line as well as the outlooks on the war in Ukraine. Hello, Philip.
Good afternoon. How are
Добро
you?
пожаловать. Да, спасибо большое.
Firstly, Russia is advancing in the Kharkiv region, but there are also other regions that are beginning to concern war analysts and the Ukrainian side, of course. What is your prognosis? How dire is the situation?
Well, I think it's very difficult at this moment, and we in the West have precipitated this difficulty by slowing down our support across the last few months, and now we are racing to try to catch back up, and the soldiers of the Ukrainian military will have to shoulder this burden that we have created for them.
I see what you're saying. However, can the Ukrainian army afford that? With the resources they have now, can they repel the Russian offensive?
At this very moment, I do not think they have everything they need. And that's why you have seen Russia amass a series of tactical gains in the north. I would agree with most other analysts that these are just tactical gains at this moment. And the need to get the resupply, especially artillery ammunition and others, to the front is acute, and we need to be pushing very hard on this from the West.
General, we frequently discuss the situation in the Kharkiv region. Kharkiv is a major city and is now under threat of siege and that it may fall. Do you see that as a likely turn of events? And if so, then when do you suppose this might come to pass? Do you see this as a likely turn of events? And if so, then when do you suppose this must come to pass?
So I do not think it's likely. I think we need to remember back to the beginning of this latest portion of this 10-year-long war, and remember that the Ukrainian forces handed Russia a strategic defeat on the north side of Kharkiv. And I believe that the Ukrainian military understands this ground and how to defend it well. And what we've seen is the Russians advance in a very limited sort of buffer zone. In fact, some believe they're trying to create a buffer zone. But the bottom line is they have had limited advances across those barriers that were not covered by fire in the north. And now they will begin to come against defenses which are covered by Ukrainian fire.
When General Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, says that the situation is on the edge, what does he mean by that? What is the worst turn of events that could take place for Ukraine in the coming months? As I understand it, he is talking about the period of time before the U.S. aid actually arrives in Ukraine, and that this difficult time needs to be overcome. What significant risks do you see currently?
Well, it's exactly as you have described. You have done it well, and that is that Russia sees a window of opportunity, and they're pushing hard to try to take that opportunity to gain as much as they can. What we have seen across this war is that when a well-supplied and prepared Ukrainian force meets a Russian force, the Ukrainian force wins. And Russia knows this. They have lost tens of thousands of troops in these most recent battles, and it's hard to imagine that in a modern military force. And so Russia wants to gain as much as they can before Ukraine is well supplied, because then they know how the battle will go.
But how much can Russia gain? How much ground is Russia capable of gaining with its current capabilities and before the US aid has arrived in Ukraine?
So I really can't make that judgment. Here's what I know. The Ukrainians have built several lines of defensive positions along this border, and the Russians have come through the first line of those defenses. But as I said before, if you do not cover barriers and minefields with direct fires, they are easy to pass. But the second, and as I have been told, the third line of defenses are well covered by Ukrainian direct fire, and that will be a much harder target for Russia to take.
With regard to immediate aid, I wanted to talk about Blinken's visit to Kiev, where Zelensky asked for the Patriot systems. As he put it, Ukraine needs at least 2 of them to defend Kharkiv and the region around it. Why the emphasis on the Patriot systems?
Well, it has proven to be a very effective weapon against the more sophisticated of the drones that Russia advances. The smaller and less sophisticated drones, the Ukrainian military has developed good tactics, techniques, and procedures to defend against them already. But the more sophisticated capabilities that Russia is now buying from Iran and others, these are tough, and the Patriot is a proven system against them, and it would be important. But we have to remember that Patriot, even though it is a magnificent weapon, has a limited area that it can cover. And so 2 will be very helpful, but it still will require more capability in the future.
If you don't mind, I would like to shift our focus from the front line to the Russian capital of Moscow. Many believe that this has become a war of resources. How do you see the appointment of a new Minister of Defense of Russia, who is an economist, affecting the situation on the front line? How do you explain the sudden removal of the former minister Sergei Shoigu, and how do you think Mr. Belousov will perform in his stead?
Well, you bring up a phrase that we use all the time in our schools, where we send our senior officers to study, and we say that amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And that is just a recognition of how key logistics are to the conduct of modern war. And this shakeup in the rear, I think it represents a lot of things. Learned speakers have said this is about addressing some of the corruption that is so prevalent in the Russian military, and that corruption being a cancer that cuts into their combat power, and Mr. Putin wanting to get past that corruption so that he can get more combat power for the dollars that are out there. The others suggest that this is about innovation, that Mr. Shoigu has been in the position for far too long, and he's not being innovative in the way that he attacks this war. And then others will also say that the gentleman taking over really has no military experience. And so the leadership, Mr. Putin, has chosen to get a fresh mind and a fresh set of thoughts on the battlefield. I think, honestly, it's a combination of all 3. A world superpower has now been fighting its neighbor for 10 years, and they hold maybe 22 or 23% of Ukraine at this point, after 10 years of fighting the Ukrainians. And I think Mr. Putin is becoming impatient that a world superpower should be doing better on the battlefield than they are. The Ukrainian military is doing a magnificent job standing alone, and they are standing alone. They are holding back a world superpower. And I think Mr. Putin is trying to affect change and get better performance from his military in the field.
If we were to talk about Vladimir Putin's overall plan, how could you describe it, judging by what we know now? Do you think that he still wishes to crush and conquer all of Ukraine, let's say by the end of 2025?
Well, I wouldn't put a date on it like that. If he thought he could do this by 2025, I think he is sadly mistaken and he will be proven wrong. But I think the first part of your statement is correct. If you go all the way back to the beginning of this latest part of the war, a little over maybe almost 2.5 years ago now, remember that Mr. Putin gave the world two documents. He called them treaties, and he wanted the West to sign these documents. And if you read those documents, they essentially reestablish a Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union style buffer zone set of states where Russia would be free to have its influence in those states. And so I do believe that Mr. Putin intends to take all of Ukraine. I believe that Mr. Putin is very active already in the state of Georgia, and not so much in a military sense, but in all the other tools of a nation. He's active there. And if you listen to what is going on in Moldova, you see that he's also active in Moldova. So already, while we worry greatly about what's going on in Ukraine, we see that Mr. Putin is active in two of his other neighboring states right now. And so we have to accept the fact that Mr. Putin's goal is all of Ukraine and more to follow.
Thank you very much. This has been Philip Breedlove, the 17th Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO Allied Command Operations.
В эфире телеканала «Дождь», а мы идем дальше.